Senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, also co-host of the ESPN NFL Matchup Show, joining us as he does every week in his weekly segment presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. Greg, one of your favorite players on Buffalo's roster is a first-team All-Pro, Matt Milano.
I saw that.
How about that?
I saw that. And you know what? Somebody knows what they're doing. Because I think
and it's you and me. That's who it is, Greg.
There you go, Steve. There you go. Well, you guys remember I've been talking about Matt Milano for 3-4 years, and
yeah.
I think he is as critical a piece in this defense as any. We know he's a 3-down player. Look, they play nickel pretty much every snap, so he's always on the field. I think he's one of the best two-way, multi-dimensional linebackers in the league, and I was really glad to see him get that recognition. Because as you guys know, I think it's really well deserved.
And as we close in on this game, the Bills hit this on a 7-game winning streak. The Dolphins get in by playing the Jets last week to an 11-6 win. Your thoughts about this? Skylar Thompson, you watched him play last week against the Jets. Obviously, the Jets are a quality defense. You knew it was going to be tough on him. What does he bring to the table?
I had to kind of slog through that game, guys. You know, that was not what I'd call an easy watch. I mean, obviously Thompson he's a rookie quarterback. He was a low-round draft choice. He wasn't viewed as a big-time prospect. Truth be told, I did not watch his tape coming out of Kansas State, so watching him in the NFL was really my first exposure to him. In looking at last week's game in detail, and then it was obviously a game they had to win, so they're playing to win. I think at this point he struggles to process what he sees both before the snap and after the snap. Just having done this a long time and understanding coverage and routes based on formations, I think that there were snaps he worked the wrong side of the formation based on the routes versus the coverage. He's got some mobility. He does not have a particularly strong arm. I think that he's very unrefined as a progression reader at this point, which I would expect. None of this is really a negative. It's just what he is now. I mean, the guy he was not a big producer in college, even though he started a lot of games. He was not a big numbers producer. He's a guy that's going to look to break down and leave the pocket. And you have to be aware of that, because the last thing you want to have happen in a game like this is you get them in 3rd and 8, and all of a sudden he leaves the pocket and runs for 12. The other thing that really stood out to me watching the tape against the Jets, who do have a good defense, is pressure looks and late rotation and coverage caused issues for him. He's not ready to work through that process either pre-snap or post-snap with the clarity that is needed.
I did notice, Greg, that when Thompson's in the game, there's a lot more 12 and 21 personnel than even the Dolphins run in the first place. It's like, between 12, if you add 12 and 21, it's almost 50% of the snaps when Thompson's in the football game. Well, maybe just explain what they're trying to get accomplished with those, bigger sets.
Well, they've been a lot like that throughout the year. I mean, even with Tua, they play a lot at a 21 because don't forget that's Mike McDaniel's background coming from San Francisco, which plays over 40% 21 with the fullback use check. So that is what he knows because he's been with Kyle his whole NFL career. So that's what he knows. I think the thing is with the Bills, I don't think it gives you exactly what you want the way it does with other teams, Brownie. Because when you line up in your base offense in terms of personnel, you're expecting and anticipating that the defense will do the same. And therefore maybe create some predictability to the fronts, to the coverage, to matchups. And since the Bills are a 95%, really 100% for the most part, nickel defense, because Teron Johnson is such a good player and can play in the box and defend the run. I don't know if you get the personnel advantage that you think you're going to get. And when I say think going to get, Mike McDaniel knows this. I'm not telling him anything he doesn't know. I'm just trying to make the point that I don't know if it's as big a factor versus Buffalo as it is against other teams.
And I think Taron Johnson, like you mentioned, and also Milano and Edmonds, those three guys, because of their versatility and their athleticism, you can be predictable in your personnel, but do anything creative you want.
Correct.
With your fronts, with your looks, with your coverages, because of their ability, and plus Poyer as well, and Hyde when he's in there. It gives you more versatility rather than more predictability.
Yes. Now, one thing I will say about the Bills, D, is, I would say from a front standpoint, they're not overly multiple. I think at their core, they're an over front. And what that means for people is that the 3-technique defensive tackle, and that's the defensive tackle that lines up on the outside shoulder of the offensive guard, he will line up to the strong side of the offensive formation, to the tight end side. So they're predominantly an over front. Now, obviously, teams change when it comes to be 3rd and long, then the fronts are different. But I think your point, Steve's a really good one. With what Teron Johnson can do, with how they can use Milano, with Edmonds, who's got tremendous length in the middle of the defense, it makes it a little more versatile than just a basic, hey, here's how they line up.
Last week, Greg, the Patriots did a pretty good job of committing to keeping Josh Allen in the pocket. He got out a few times, but not nearly as much as he usually does. It looked like they were making a concerted effort to keep him there rather than let him escape on an off-script play, broken play, run, scramble, etc. Knowing the Dolphins and the difficulty they have in getting consistent pressure, do you think they might take a page out of that book and say, let's at least eliminate Allen as a runner?
Well, all we have is the way they played in the past. When they played, that was week 15, I believe. It was not that long ago. That
Correct.
Was the game when it was supposed to snow, and I guess it didn't snow until the 4th quarter. Very poetically, as the Bills won the game. But they used a spy on Josh quite a bit in that game. And even though the Patriots tried to keep him in the pocket, we saw him get out of the pocket and direct John Brown and throw a touchdown. That's a hard thing to do. And the reason I say it's hard is because sometimes, and you guys know this, there's no rhyme or reason why Josh leaves the pocket. I mean, sometimes he can drop back and the pocket is relatively secure and clean, and he will just leave, because I think that's kind of built into his DNA. And it always comes down to Josh with precision versus instincts. And the last thing you want to do is take away his instincts. So you live with him at times leaving the pocket prematurely. Pure pocket quarterbacks obviously don't have that issue because they grew up in the position never having to use their legs. That's not the case with Josh. So it'll be curious to see if the Dolphins again use a spy. I remember he hit McKenzie for 19 yards on a 3rd down play in that Week 15 game, where they used, I think Bethel was the spy, because I don't believe Eric Rowe played in that Week 15 game. They used Bethel as the spy, and it was a play that to be honest with you, I looked at it 20 times, and I'm still not sure why Josh left the pocket, but he ended up leaving the pocket and throwing to McKenzie for 19 yards. So sometimes he just does that. The thing to me about this offense for the Bills is they're the only offense in the NFL with a 3rd down conversion rate above 50%. And 3rd down is the quarterback's down. So, whether he's throwing from the pocket or making something happen outside the pocket, they convert 3rd downs.
Right. And you're right. And here's the thing, too. We've seen this happen. A lot of these defenses that the Bills face, we saw it all the way back really when Josh exploded in 2020.
Yeah.
Where the reason Josh Allen is Josh Allen and one of these elite quarterbacks in with Mahomes and with Joe Burrow is because even if they call the perfect defense, it turns into a touchdown.
It can.
And
and that's why you live.
That's right.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Steve, that's why you live with a couple of, that's why I made the point about precision versus instincts. Every once in a while, like you look at the interception he threw in the red zone last that this week, because that's the only way theoretically the Dolphins can stay in the game, because you don't expect the Dolphins to put up 24, 28 points in this game. To me, on that interception in the red zone, it was an empty set. And to me, the coverage should have told him to work to the trip side, but he worked to the 2-man side, which is okay but then you have Diggs wide open right away. So you got to make that throw. So he waited and waited and waited to try to hit Davis in the back of the end zone, and then the pressure gets there. So, that's just who he is. And I'm not saying that's acceptable. You obviously don't want that to happen. But there's always going to be a balance with him between precision and instincts. And, obviously you're going to ask him, in the meeting, hey, what'd you see? But, you're not going to say to him, don't do that, because that takes away the great plays that he does make. Look, this wasn't an extend the play, obviously, but the touchdown he threw to Diggs in the Patriots game, I mean, that was a far hash throw, Steve. That ball was 70-plus yards in the air, right on the money. I mean, how many guys are making that throw in the NFL?
Yeah, it was pretty stupid.
And so say you're the head coach of the Bills. How do you feel about his 12 picks?
I think you talk to him about it. Coaches have to coach. I mean,
right.
You know the old expression, you either coach it or you let it happen. You have to coach it, but you're not yelling at him. You're basically saying, hey, Josh, what did you see? And you let him explain it. And then you say in that situation, I would assume, I'm not a coach, so, hey, a coach might tell me that you approach it differently. But then I think you would say, hey, we just want to be aware of the situation there. We're in the red zone. It's third down. We have points. You want to be a little more careful there, which is exactly what you want. We know he's thrown a few too many red zone picks this year. Picks you have to look at each one as a separate entity. You can't just look at a number on a page, but you still have to talk to him about it, Steve. You just don't deal with it as oh my God, what are you doing? Because if you deal with it that way, you don't want him to start thinking, well, gee, I better not move. I better just stand there and just play like a robot, because one of the things that makes him special is his ability to do stuff that other guys can't do.
Right. So going back to the Week 15 game, Greg, the Dolphins rolled up 188 yards on the ground.
Yeah.
Which was a problem. But they would still throw the ball, I think, because Mike McDaniel knew that if we're going to keep up with them, we can't completely lean on the running game to any great degree, because it takes too long to score that way. And if this team is scoring, which they were in that game, the Bills, we got to keep up with them.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, and now knowing you got Thompson as your starting quarterback, I can understand wanting to lean on that run game and see if you can get it to work the same way it did in Week 15. But if the Bills are scoring points, and really Miami has not been able to stop Josh Allen ever, the Bills will stop him more than anybody else. I don't know how that can find the Dolphins out on the right end of the scoreboard with Thompson at quarterback.
Without crazy things happening. That's why, Josh can't throw picks. That's why you can't fumble a punt. That's why your backs can't fumble like Singletary did last week. Those things can't happen in this game, Brownie, because if the game were just to play out normally without those things, even if the Bills weren't explosive and didn't put up 35, you would think that the Dolphins, they could still win this game almost like they beat New England on the Thursday night game when they won, 24-10? Was that the score on Thursday night when they beat New England?
Yes.
I believe it was. So you would think that they could just win the game that way, But you're right. I mean, look, Mostert had a 67-yard run in that game, Week 15. More than likely, that's not going to happen again. You don't see many 67-yard runs. But the bottom line is, and you mentioned the run defense, in that game, they did run well inside. The Bills' D-line had maybe one of its worst games defending the run this year. They got blocked and moved, and that allowed the O-line to climb effectively to Milano and Edmonds, and they were able to block them. So you definitely have to clean that up in this game.
Okay, so assuming the Bills, do clean that up, how desperate and how creative and how exotic do you think Mike McDaniel could get, knowing you got to pull out all the stops, especially if the Bills have an answer for that run game?
And I think he will do that. I don't know if you saw the first play of the 49ers Cards game this past week, where they went with a flea flicker, reverse flea flicker, and they threw a touchdown to A.J. Green, and they went up 7-0 on the first play of the game. Obviously, the Niners were the much better team, and they came back to win pretty big. But I think you're going to see those kinds of things, Brownie. I mean, obviously, that's not going to happen every other play. but he has to try to manufacture offense in this game. You know, one of the telltale signs of a quarterback that is not seeing things within the context of your offense is when I watched the Dolphins this past week against the Jets. You know what you didn't see? You didn't see those in-breaker throws to Hill and Waddle. Whereas with Tua, you see those 12 times every game, you know, right, and you didn't see him this week. I mean, I think you saw one, and it might have been the only play in which he actually progression read. But you didn't see any of those throws because he's not seeing it that way. So, you know, they have to do something to manufacture and orchestrate and in some ways improvise offense. And you know what? They may do that. And that's the one thing you got to be careful about. You got to be careful that all of a sudden they do a couple of things and it's late in the first quarter and you're losing 10-0. You know, right. And all of a sudden the game takes on a different feel. I mean, Steve, you know how those things happen. No matter how much better you are than another team, it's the playoffs. It's a different kind of game. And all of a sudden the game takes on a different feel.
Yeah, and that feel has to do with how you play. I mean, you start gripping pretty bad, and you think, listen, we got to get back into this, or we're going to go, you know, and it starts to affect the way you are going forward rather than just playing your game. You decide you got to do something a little extra or a little different or a little more than you normally would just because you're down early.
Yeah, to use a baseball term, you're trying to hit a grand slam home run with no one on base, you know?
Right. That's right. How do you feel about, you know, Mike McDaniel? Let's just say this. I mean, there's been some stuff coming around about the Dolphins going forward. Give us you've watched all of these games.
Yeah.
Give us your idea of what Mike McDaniels has been as a head coach after year one.
Well,
regular season.
My guess is, and I think I'm right about this, but my guess is even though he's the head coach, he's the offensive coach, and that the defense is coached by Josh Boyer. So I think as an offensive coach, he can be really creative and also very efficient with basic concepts. I think he has a really good mix of that, of taking basic concepts and kind of being creative in how he gets to them. I mean, don't forget, you know, all those in-breaking routes that they hit this year with Hill and Waddle, those are quick rhythm throws. You know, they're not, he's not reinventing the wheel. It comes off RPO action. It comes off play action. It comes off what Tua can do really well. And obviously he's not playing. You know, and Tua is what his game is he was twitchy on his drop and his set with a really compact delivery, and the ball would get out. And what they do is by their use of motion is they would stretch the field horizontally with their use of motion. And then that would create space between the numbers. And because everything then happens so quick, the ball could be thrown between the numbers, you know, those short, quick throws. They tried to do those kinds of things with Thompson, but either he didn't see it, recognize it. You know, I can't speak to what's in his head, but those plays didn't happen, you know. So maybe they'll happen with another week of practice, because clearly he is practicing this week as the starting quarterback. So you have to be prepared for the fact that Thompson will likely be better. Whatever that means, I don't think anyone can say until we play the game.
Looking at the rest of the playoff schedule, Greg, is there one that tickles your fancy more than another? The 4-5s are always interesting, right?
What's that?
The 4-5 seed games are always interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of, the Tampa Bay Dallas game is fascinating to me because I thought that Dak Prescott last week, he played really poorly, and he played poorly in an odd kind of way to me. I mean, everybody can say turnovers. Okay, we know that. We know you don't want to turn the ball over. But he wasn't seeing things. His vision was so limited. And when you don't see things, you tend to play fast because you know you don't have time. So he looked like a young quarterback trying to feel his way as opposed to a veteran quarterback who's done this for a long time. So I find that game interesting. And I think that Jaguars-Chargers game, I guess that's the battle of the quarterbacks with the hair. That's the hair game. That's the hairband game, you know? But I'm really fascinated because I really like watching Herbert play. I just love the fact that he gets the ball out and gets completions, and then at the same time can drive the ball down the field so easily. You know, I mean, you know, I think most people probably would say at this point in time, you know, you're dealing with Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, and Burrow. You know, I'm not giving an order, but I'm saying those four guys are kind of the guys right now. And, I really like watching Herbert, and Lawrence has played well over the last part of the season. And Doug Peterson, coming from the Andy Reid school, there's a lot of really well-schemed pass game concepts that define things so nicely for Lawrence, and he's executing at a high level.
Yeah, and I think the 4 or 5 games, while they are, the Chargers are going on the road.
Yep.
After having won significantly more games than the team that's hosting them in Jacksonville. Give us your idea about the way this might shake out. I mean, those to me, the Chargers to me are a better football team than the Jaguars.
Yeah, the Chargers defense to me is interesting because I think they've gotten better as the year's gone on, but they still have moments where they struggle to stop the run. I think they've got a couple of players who really stand out on film that are probably not well known. I think their linebacker Tranquil is a really good football player. And I think he's a big factor in a lot of the things they do. He normally does not come off the field. I think Joseph Day, a D tackle for them, is a really good player, really good run player. We know about Derwin James. So to me, their defense has to be a factor. They don't have to be a shutdown defense, but, one of the things that they struggled with all of last year and through a good part of the season was the inability to stop the run. And the one thing you cannot allow in this game is ATN to have big explosive runs because they can pressure the quarterback. That's one thing I believe they should be able to do in this game.
Greg, thanks as always. Enjoy the games this weekend. A lot to review come Monday for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Even though there's only 6 games instead of like 13.
That is
a big
true.
Weekend.
Yeah,
that does make it a little better. No question about it. So,
all right. Hopefully
thanks, guys.
All right, catch up with you next week. Thanks, Greg.